Alright, what is up guys? Ben, Mobility Specialist from MTP Health here. Just wanting to educate everyone on another key concept that underpins everything that we do as movement specialists within Move, Train, Perform. Now, it's the concept of the sum of the parts. Now, essentially if you looked at the kind of kinetic chain video that I just kind of talked about, or if you looked at our training equals rehab spectrum, you'll understand this concept of everything's connected in the body. I've drawn a bit of a crude diagram to really articulate that quite nicely. So everything is essentially the sum of the parts, and this is how we should start to think about how we create optimal performance and what it means to be an ideal human being in terms of performance and preventing injury. Because as we know, preventing injury is exactly the same as optimizing performance when we do things well and intelligently. So if we look at this diagram of all the dots, imagine that each one of these dots is kind of like an individual joint. And the reason why the body kind of is broken up into these lines is, well, like my elbow, that's a joint. Wrist, there's a series of joints in there. I mean, we have a lot more bones. It's a little bit crude at times, but for the most part, these are the individual joints that are going to take the stress. And as we talked about with the kind of ground reaction force concept, we'll understand that these joints will all have stress that's brought from the ground going through them. And if we lack mobility in certain ones, or we have extra mobility in other ones, such as in the low back, we're going to experience performance decreases and actual injury and pain. So when we look at this diagram here, we see the spine is a series of dots. Now the spine is essentially designed to move completely freely. I'm doing this spinal wave exercise that you see in the class a lot, and it's designed to move as 33 different segments, and the hip is actually part of those segments where it's split down the middle. It's not moving a lot, but it's designed to move in that sense. And then we've got the hip joint itself, which has a lot of movement. Now all of these dots have varying degrees of movement, of course. But the reason I've drawn it up like this is for you to understand that, well, the body to work in its absolute best capacity is simply the sum of all of these parts. If there's a movement that requires your whole body and even one of these parts is off, then that movement isn't going to be as optimal as you would like it to be. Now, I've got here a model of a spine, and it really helps us to see this in real time. So what we have is all of the individual spinal segments that are all designed to move in isolation of each other. They're designed to twist, to extend, to flex, and rotate. All of these things should be able to move. Now the reason the spine is so important obviously is because it has the nervous system running through it, which communicates all of the messages from our brain to the rest of the body. Now in here we've got the pelvis, which is these two little bits here. So they can actually move slightly, a little bit, and the spine connects down in through the lumbar spine into the sacrum down the bottom here. Now all of these joints have the ability to move, but what we see is commonly this will be nice and stiff because we're sitting at the computer all day, we're rounded, so the top freezes, and then the low back starts to take pressure. And the other reason why that is because, well, we get told to stand up with our shoulders straight, but what happens is we're actually compressing that low back further. Now this is an area that tends to be more mobile than others. And so, as we kind of articulated, that is usually a weak link in the chain for people. But why is that a weak link? It's not because the low back is actually weak or struggling. It's because of the areas above and below. So the hips are lacking mobility. So the hip joint itself can't fully move through a range of motion, particularly when squatting. It's very common. And so that is going to impart extra stress into this part, along with the thoracic being frozen because of that computer posture. So that increases pain into this area. Now again, the example that I always love to talk about is, well, it's not just pain, because we know, again, injury and performance, or avoiding injury in injury prevention and performance, are the same thing when we do things properly. Now if we look at, like say, a snatch for example, what we see all the time is people going up for a squat, they come up to catch, and they hike out in their low back, overextending to catch. Now a lot of people will have this kind of hot area down here in their erector spinae, and one of the terms that they use in the functional range conditioning system is like they've got a second arse on their back. So they're Low back is taking the force that their butt should be taking, their glute max muscles. And what's happening is because they lack the hip mobility and the thoracic spine mobility to get in the proper place, that low back just compresses. And it's taking all of the force that should be being taken through the spine and the hips and the rest of the body, distributed evenly and nicely. But that reason that is because people lack the mobility to be able to properly do that stuff. And so not only does it have implications for injury, but it has implications for optimal performance. Because at the highest levels of weightlifting, when you're lifting heavy and going towards a PR, the difference of 1 or 2 millimeters in terms of the way the weight stacks over your body can mean the difference between a failed lift or a dislocated shoulder and an ideal performance. So it's going to affect your ability to get stronger, it's going to affect your ability to run faster, to move better, to do everything. And so that's why we must start to consider the sum of the parts. And firstly, and this is why mobility is the foundation of the pyramid, we must understand how we can get each of the individual parts, each of these dots, to work at their absolute best. And that's what the Freedom Mobility Program is all about. We teach you how to move each of your joints through their maximal controlled range of motion so that you can ideally create the best possible body. And so that would be an example of the spine. If we have a look at another joint, we can see the complexity of it, the shoulder. We've got these little scapulars there drawn, and the shoulder connects into that. Now there's so many degrees of freedom and ways that this can move. It goes in all different directions because of the way the ligaments attach and a series of muscles going all over. And so if you have any limitations in the shoulder, well, chances are they're because of more than just the shoulder. It's going to be because of your spine. It's going to be because potentially even the ankle and things like that, because of the way that the shoulder sits on all of these individual little joints. And so a lot of people struggle with shoulder problems, but more often than not, it's not in fact the shoulder itself. It's a whole series of issues. And that's why mobility is such a complex issue to address. And that's why we really want to take 10 weeks to structure it and make sure we do it. If we have a look at the knee, another classic example of a joint that will struggle due to issues of mobility. Well, the knee is actually a pretty rigid structure. But what happens is the hip might be a bit off, or the ankle might be a bit off, or the spine might be a bit off, and it's going to take a lot more force than it should. It doesn't really move too much, but it's another one of those joints that really suffers due to other joints being affected. And so again, if you lack the individual parts to move properly, then you have to ask yourself the question, do you have the joints that you need to have? If you ask yourself that question, and you honestly don't know the answer, well, start to reevaluate it. Think about it. You see, the beauty of the system that we use in the MTP mobility program is that we give you a way to appraise all of your individual joints and to see how they move in their best capacity. We give you a way to see if your joints move as the way they should. If you don't know the answer to that, you can check out some of our videos, particularly the overhead squat video. That'll give you a great idea of how well your joints move as they're intended. Or you can check out our controlled articular rotations video, and we run through all of that for you guys. You know, hopefully we can see you in the clinic and work with you guys in person, but there's plenty of stuff available. So I really want to implore you guys to start asking yourself the question, do you have the joints that you need to be able to perform at your absolute best? Because it's our mission to transform and empower people through understanding how to improve the way they move in the best way possible. Thanks again, guys, and I'll catch you guys on the next level or the next time. Cheers. And as always, keep moving, stay mobile, and live free.